was having a little chat with somebody recently. Somebody who's quite clued up. I would describe him as quite clued up spiritually. And he knows I do these videos, but he's never looked at them, which I think is a shame because I think he'd get something out of them. But then again, nobody that I know from my set of personal acquaintances looks at my videos, even though they know I do them. I think they must assume it's some kind of little trip of mine, some little head trip or something. And this friend of mine, his take on it was that I've got some kind of romance or some kind of mystical interest in these ancient texts. Maybe I like the idea of them and I get excited about that. And I suppose there is something to that. I mean, they are quite remarkable, these ancient texts, written down hundreds of years ago, maybe even a couple of thousand years ago, leading us into some very deep insight. But this isn't the point, really. I'm looking into these texts because they take us deeper than any other teaching that I know of. If I thought there was somebody else teaching this stuff, I wouldn't be bothered doing it. I'd just be listening to their videos. And there are some very good teachers out there, but my own feeling is that these teachers are really simply a first step. They give us that first step, perhaps, whereby then we can enter into the much greater depths that these teachings present. And when you look at these teachings, they do seem a bit obscure. There's all this terminology that you have to get your head around. You have to learn a little bit about Buddhism or Hinduism, or about this understanding which arose in India millennia ago, that understanding of enlightenment. So there's quite a lot of stuff that you might be put off by. Although I don't see any reason to be put off by it. It's quite exciting. You're entering into this, well, something of a promised land. It's very exciting. It's not about getting a philosophical take on things or getting into a certain kind of aesthetic experience, although you can go for that sort of thing if you want, but that's not what it's about. But I agree, it can look quite daunting, quite intimidating. What are all these words? What are all these new terms referring to? What are they all pointing to? What exotic, rarefied states of consciousness are they tempting us with? So we can get into that sort of thing. Now, I think it was when I was doing this series on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras that I realised that it wasn't about exotic, rarefied states of consciousness. It was actually about our moods. And I was a little hesitant to start talking about moods. Is this really what it's about? And then I thought, well, actually, it can't be about anything else. There doesn't seem to be a Sanskrit word for mood. And yet, it is our moods that are keeping us from realizing the promise of enlightenment. So this was a bit of a revelation. And it seemed quite obvious to me that if you're not enlightened, then you're in a mood. And this made the teachings, it brought the teachings right down to earth. This is what the teachings are addressing. The momentum, the energy of our moods. And just recently I fine-tuned this. It takes a while, but I fine-tuned it. And I'd rather than talk about moods, I'd rather talk about our sensibilities. Because we're very attached to our sensibilities. If you're a spiritual person, you probably are, if you're looking at these videos, then you're probably a very sensitive person. In fact, you might even be what's called highly strung. You might be a highly strung person, easily jarred, easily knocked down, easily saddened, easily depressed. And I mentioned earlier in the previous video about, for example, the effect that the news that we're getting from Ukraine is having on me. This is my sensibilities. I can't listen to it. I can't listen to what's going on in Syria. It's so awful. But never mind that. In the past I've spoken about my night shift job, working in a popular budget hotel, and how my sensibilities are often affronted by some of the rather merry guests that come wobbling in during the night in various states of inebriation. And all this is enhanced by the fact that it's a night shift job and I'm tired. So this is another factor. This is what we have to deal with. Not just the news from outside, not just our own situation, but we've got to deal also with our own physiology, our hormones, whether we're hungry or not, whether we're tired or not, whether we're in physical pain or not. So all of this fuels how we feel. It fuels our sensibilities. This is what consciousness is trapped in. And this is what the spiritual seeker is looking for a way out of. And the spiritual seeker in these verses is Mahamati. In verse 699 he asked the Buddha, "Pray tell me as to the graded succession of the stages, O Lotus-eyed One, for the world cherishes dualism and is bewildered with wrong views." So there is this idea that there's this, if we practice certain techniques, then we can somehow get out of all this. And the more we practice, the more we free ourselves from the clutches of the world and our sensibilities until we reach some kind of nirvana. So these stages are sometimes formalized, but we don't need to worry about that, because the point here is that it's an ongoing process. As I said, there are many teachers, and perhaps you've been along to some of these teachers, and there might be one particular that you've clicked with. And I don't just mean on a kind of interpersonal level, I mean that you've understood the teaching, and it's given you a different take on things. It's given you a perspective on your own sensibilities. Now, these sensibilities are about cherishing dualism. We actually do cherish our sensibilities. We actually feel that we have every right to indulge them. This is the situation. It's not right. I am outraged. I am indignant. It's a bit like road rage. Something has gone wrong. Somebody's done something wrong. They shouldn't have done it. I am outraged. I am entitled to be angry. I am entitled to throw a tantrum. This is cherishing dualism. Indulging your sensibilities is cherishing dualism. It is about reinforcing your moods, reinforcing the idea that you take your cue for how you feel from the world around you, from what other people do. This is wrong views. We don't need to do this. It's a limitation. It's suffering. And we have to keep practicing this. This is what's meant by the succession of stages. Are we able to let go of our sensibilities? I've persevered in this night shift job. I think I actually had some kind of breakdown as a result of it a couple of years back. It's something I'm still recovering from. Although I can't really blame the job. I have to blame my own sensibilities. It isn't really the job that's right for me. It's right outside my comfort zone. But I have to say, it's going very well now. I make sure I only work the number of hours on my contract, which is only a couple of nights. Previously I was working so many nights, but now I just stick to my contracted number of nights, which is just 2 nights. And the last 2 weeks I've been working at the weekends, which are particularly busy. And normally I would have dreaded them, but they were fine. They were fine. And I've mentioned before about my physical health. Still not what I'd like it to be, but I had some good news recently on the results of a recent blood test. Certain trends and imbalances in my blood seem to have been reversed. This isn't through medication or anything, it's just what's happened. So this job has actually been quite a good opportunity to examine my sensibilities, to examine my reaction to drunk people. Drunk people are usually alright. It's just that occasionally some people seem to think that being drunk is an excuse to behave in a rather offensive fashion. But most people are actually alright with it. But for some reason, I think it's because I grew up in a rather rough part of the world where alcohol was often at the heart of a lot of violence. People are out of order, out of control, and it maybe unnerved me. And I've kind of grown up with that. It's part of my sensibilities. So now I've got a chance to deal with all this and not give in to it. So if you are highly strung and perhaps oversensitive, it's something to acknowledge. And it's important to observe how you feel these sensibilities. And it's important to have a look at the feelings that fuel the thoughts, which fuel the feelings, which fuel the thoughts. There's a feedback loop that goes on, which constitute your sensibilities. We have to ride with the feelings and not fuel the thoughts. And in this way we stop cherishing the dualism which fuels our sensibilities. And in this way we realize we are responsible for our own happiness. As enlightenment practitioners, we've taken a step away from the world. We no longer need to look to it for our happiness. Then we realize we can be as happy as it's possible to be. This is the focus of these wonderful Mahayana sutras. They present to us landscapes of happiness, landscapes that we can enter into. I don't know what other teaching does this. So the appeal of these texts to me is of these wonderful vistas of happiness that they invite us to enter. And I hope that you're joining me in entering into them. What a wonderful prospect.